VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And we do thank you for joining us on Crosstalk today here on VCY America. Just before we introduce our guest today, we just want to take time to mention how grateful we are for just the many outlets that air Crosstalk, providing the program to you each and every day. These stations that provide airtime for Crosstalk are able to do so because of your directly financially supporting these stations. So we encourage you to support the station from which you hear Crosstalk and thank them for carrying this broadcast. And from time to time, we hear of these stations that are having share-a-thons. Right now is such the case with WDFB in Danville, Kentucky. We encourage listeners there to support their local radio station, and that goes universally across all stations. Our own VCY station's having a share-a-thon later this week, but our many thanks to stations providing the airtime for Crosstalk, and be sure you get behind and support them. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this past Friday, some troubling information came to us from Liberty Counsel regarding a requirement received by churches in one municipality to hand over to the government. Put yourself in the situation. Hand over to the government your membership list, names, addresses, phone numbers of those who enter the church building, all in the name of battling the coronavirus. We're here to discuss this issue along with Reopen Church initiatives and related issues. We welcome back Matt Staver. He's a constitutional attorney. He's founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Matt has argued before all levels of court, including landmark cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. He's an author, speaker on the radio programs Faith and Freedom and Freedom's Call. Matt, thanks for joining us here today on Crosstalk.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Matt, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw this press release come through from Liberty Counsel pertaining to Kansas City, Missouri. Tell us what's happening.
Yeah, and this is one that you really scratch your head. In fact, I was doing an interview with a national reporter, and when they got it, they said, this just didn't sound right. It can't be true. Is it really happening in the country? And so they asked where the citations were. We gave them to them, and they did their own research, and they said, oh my goodness, it is true. It comes out of Kansas City, Missouri. Now, this is the city of Kansas City, but it's also got a consolidated, border apparently with the county. And so they have this typical essential, non-essential, right? But now on May the 6th, they say that they're going to start relaxing some of the restrictions on the non-essential. Well, non-essential includes churches. But they say that there's two things. One, you've got a 10-10-10 rule, which we'll talk about. But they also say for any of these non-essentials, which is churches as well, that anyone who comes in and stays more than 10 minutes, you need to record their name and their contact information, which would be your addresses, phone numbers, and other things. And then you need to keep those records for 30 days. And then it says this, quote, all data obtained by the Department of Public Health will remain confidential, right, and will be used only to address public health concerns and contact individuals who may have been exposed to COVID-19. They talk about recording customers' names. Businesses will be able to, the city will be able to track and trace and isolate individuals. This is from their actual statement. They can quickly trace, test, and isolate individuals who may have been exposed to COVID-19. Now, so here's what happens. If somebody is in the church and they find out, well, this person may have been exposed to COVID-19, not even if they're confirmed COVID-19 by a test. And they say, well, where have you been in the last 30 days? Well, I went to this particular church. And they would say, all right, we're going to go to that church, and we're going to demand all the information be provided for everybody that's ever come there in that last 30 days, names, phone numbers, contact information. And then what are they going to do? These people that came, they're going to get phone calls, they're going to get letters, they're going to get emails, they're going to be contacted by the Department of Health, and then what are they going to do? They're going to trace them, they're going to require testing of them, and they're going to isolate those that may have come in contact. What's that mean? If somebody perhaps is suspected to have COVID and they attended a church or even some of these other non-essential places where you might go, then you're going to have to be tested, tracked, and isolated, meaning you'll have to go into quarantine. And if you don't, they're going to forcibly require you to do so. So you imagine, Jim, not even talking about people who regularly attend the church. I'm talking about, say, somebody who's a visitor, and they come to the church on Sunday, and they say, they are greeted at the door by an usher. Can you give me your name? And they'll probably look at you a little strange. Why do you want my name? And we also need your contact. How do we get in touch with you? Give me your address, your email, your cell phone number.
Wow.
Guess what they would do? They would say, why do you want all of that? Well, because the government, Kansas City, requires us to do it so that they can possibly trace you, test you, and even isolate you in the event they find out that somebody may have been possibly exposed to COVID-19.
I can see them turning around and walking out the door.
There's no way. I wouldn't go in. And they say, now, if somebody does not give you that information, what are you supposed to do? Let them in and just say, well, we did our duty. No, refuse them entry. And you'd have to say to that person, I'm sorry, if you don't give us that information, this is a person that may be seeking the Lord. They're coming to find help. Maybe their first time, they're trying to reach out to actually come to church and perhaps maybe even giving their life to the Lord that day. But you tell them, unless you give me all that information, that private information, we can't let you inside this church.
My. So what I understand then, Matt, is 10 days down the road, you might get a phone call from somebody saying somebody in that vicinity may have had COVID-19, and you could be summoned to quarantine yourself.
Yeah, and it's not 10, it's 30 days.
30 days.
You have to keep this for 30 days. So, on the 30th plus day, like on the 35th day, I guess, you supposedly, under this particular policy as it's existing now, don't have to keep it, but you have to keep it for 30 days. So you might even have visited that church as you're looking for churches, perhaps, as you're going back to church services, and this church is starting to open up. And you'll say, that was 25 days ago I was there. Why would I don't have any symptoms now. But you get contact. Well, no, you got to come in. We're going to have to test you, and we may have to isolate you. And then they're going to find out every person that person has been in contact with. Oh. And they'll put all that together, and the intrusion on your privacy is unbelievable.
Yeah. I went to Walmart, and then I picked up this meal from this drive-through, and I did this and I did that, and the circle gets bigger. Matt, you referred to the 10-10-10 rule or 10-10-10 plan.
Yeah, this 10-10-10 plan is unbelievable because here's what they're doing. Well, churches, you can start to open up on May the 6th, but here's the deal. You can't have more than 10 people inside. It doesn't matter whether you have a 1,000-seat sanctuary, and there's some mega churches in Kansas City, by the way. I was talking to one that had a 700-seat sanctuary. Under this particular rule, they can only have 10 people there, 10 people inside. But also it says that outside, so if you want to do a parking lot service, outside you can only have 50 people. It doesn't matter how big your parking lot is or how big the loudspeakers are. It doesn't matter whether you communicate through some other electronic device. You can only have 50 people outside, 50 people in their cars. So that's less, obviously, than 50 cars if you have people that are more than one in a particular car. And then you have to provide social distancing and so forth. So this is absolutely unreal. Up until now, they weren't allowing any kind of religious services. Now they're going to throw a crumb. But they don't have any authority to tell you how to worship, that it has to be online, or that it can only be in the parking lot while people sit in the cars with the windows rolled up. They don't have the authority to tell you that you can only have 10 people. There's no constitutional authority at all. In fact, it's to the contrary, that the government can tell you, yeah, we'll throw you a few crumbs, but no more than 10 people, especially when, on the essential side of the category, we have photographs with hundreds and hundreds of vehicles parked in, the various parking lots of the commercial operations, Home Depot, Walmart, Kmart, Costco, BJ's, whatever it is, the liquor stores, even in the marijuana dispensaries and so forth, with no social distancing requirements imposed on them.
This 10-10-10 plan, I see I was looking at another story. You can reopen with 10% of your occupancy or maximum of 10 people. And if they're in the building longer than 10 minutes, then you have to. That's another one of those 10s. If they're there longer than 10 minutes. Yeah,
that's the other 10. The 10-minute rule is, and so what's going to happen? You're going to be in a church obviously longer than 10 minutes. That means that everybody that you have come into your service, you have to record their names and all their contact, and and then provide that to the Department of Health. Now, they say, the mayor's coming out, and he says, well, they're not going to ask for the information unless it's necessary. But they actually say all the data obtained by the Department of Health, and that's what they say, all the data obtained by the Department of Health. So, while they may say it's only going to be required if necessary, the problem is what is necessary? And it's up to them to determine that. And if they just want to find out how many people are coming to your church, well, then they're going to say that it's necessary.
Yeah. Oh, Matt, I understand also that even as they so-called relax, for non-essentials here, we understand last Thursday that the Kansas City mayor signed this third amended proclamation and extending this period of the state emergency to August 15th of 2020.
That's right. So August 15th. And this, this is the problem that we have with this situation, is that the goalposts continually get moved.
Right.
You think you're getting ready to turn the corner, and you may be a few days away, and they move the goalpost, and you've got another full football field to go before you cross the finish line. And then it just keeps happening. So, this is the problem with these orders. We have a great decision, and we can talk about it later, that happened over the weekend at the Court of Appeals. And the reasoning here is the same thing that also happened with the Department of Justice that intervened and filed a statement of interest yesterday in one of our cases, which we can talk about, and that is this unequal treatment. The court and the Department of Justice pointed out the unequal treatment, that you can have these secular gatherings with no problem, and the stores are packed, as we all know, but you can't have any religious gatherings, and that they just arbitrarily deem what's essential, and they deem religious services and attendance at houses of worship is not essential. Yeah. That's not the government's role. It's unconstitutional to do that.
And, Matt, we're going to head to Kentucky in a moment, but one further question. When we see what's going on in Kansas City, Missouri right now with this, is it too far afoul to look at what happened in Nazi Germany with keeping track of?
It's not at all. In fact, this is what they started to do with the Jews and the others that they wanted to eventually eliminate, and that was they started tracking people, and then they obviously wanted to isolate them and quarantine them and put them in ghettos. It sounds very similar to what we're happening here. Obviously, the whole, that no one would have thought that it would have led to what they wanted to do ultimately, but it starts with tracking people and stigmatizing them and tracing them and then isolating them. It actually talks about isolating them, and that's exactly what happened during Nazi Germany. This, by the way, Jim, is a bigger discussion because this is a low-tech version, manual taking of the data, of what there is now out there as a push for high-tech tracing, contact tracing, where they would use social media and your cell phone to trace where you've been and all the different people and places you've come in contact with, and that you would have to provide certain information as a prerequisite to enter anything. And this is happening around the world right now. And by the way, it's unbelievable. Some of this has been funded in the recent stimulus packages for the CDC.
Folks, we're going to take a quick break. Indeed, houses of worship are under assault. Matt Staver with us from Liberty Counsel. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to finish up here with Kansas City, and then we're going to transition to what's going on in Kentucky and also in Virginia. This is Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation researcher with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, are animals more and more intelligent as they march up the evolutionary tree?
Chris, let's get this straight. Evolution did not happen. There is no valid evolutionary tree. There are no higher animals. It stands to reason in evolution that the apes would be the most intelligent of the animals, only bested by mankind. While it is true that apes have a larger brain than do, say, toads, there are a lot of animals thought to be lower on the evolutionary tree which are quite intelligent. A number of insects can do things that would astound you. Now even a fish has been discovered that can use tools in digging its burrow. Chris, there is no hierarchy of the animals leading to man. Each of the animals were created separately after their kind, each with unique abilities. Chris, it makes so much sense when you go back to Genesis for your starting point.
You can find us on the web at www.icr.org.
Houses of worship under assault. That's our topic today with constitutional attorney Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are regular listeners to this program will know back several months ago we did some interviews on Christian persecution around the world. And one of the things that they mentioned going on in China is the fact that the government was putting in cameras to monitor people going in and out of churches, but not only that, but putting them in the front of auditoriums so that the cameras would see everybody as they're sitting in that auditorium to hear what was going on in those Chinese churches. And people were aghast at saying how horrible that is to have the government watching you as you're sitting in church. Matt, we're not too far afoul from that as it relates to Kansas City.
No, it's a low-tech version of that right there. But, once they get the high-tech version, that's going to be the same thing. And, in China, they have the high-tech version there already, and they're implementing this in other parts of the country or the world, including even Israel right now is implementing something like this where you have to have a QR code in Israel now or some other certificate to be able to go into the shopping whenever they start opening the shopping centers open. In China, though, you have a mandatory app. We've gotten information from people who live in China, and they've had to put mandatory apps on their cell phones. And that cell phone app has to be shown when you enter into any place, and it has green, yellow, and red to determine whether or not you have access. And that's based upon whether you have been contacted by the virus, somebody that you've been close to, anything like that. What's your vaccinations history and schedule and all that. And if it doesn't come up to par, you don't get entry. You don't get access.
Matt, we've got to move from Kansas City, but to the state of Kentucky. By the way, is this under some kind of appeal in Kansas City at this point?
Well, right now there's no litigation yet, but there will be if it doesn't ultimately get reversed. Okay. So we're trying to get them to reverse that. I can tell you that there's some other federal officials that are actually looking into this thing as well, and maybe we'll have some movement where they weigh in later this week.
From Kansas City, Missouri, let's go to the state of Kentucky because you've been involved in representing, I believe it's Maryville Baptist Church there?
That's right.
And this church had received visits from the Kentucky State Police Easter Sunday. Tell us what's happening in the state of Kentucky and the recent victory as well.
Yeah, on Easter Sunday, the state police, at the direction of Governor Beshear, the Democratic governor there, who threatened to do this on Good Friday, they showed up in the parking lot. They didn't go inside the church. There were a small group of people inside the church, and there were people out in the parking lot having parking lot service. They went car to car to car, even the people that were in their cars listening to the parking lot service, which was being broadcast across the parking lot. And they gave them notices, and those notices were mandatory quarantine. A few days later, that same week of Easter Sunday, the governor sent out letters to all of the owners of those vehicles saying that they and all the occupants needed to be quarantined for 14 days, take their temperature at a certain specific time every day, and report that to the County Board of Health. And there were restrictions on their travel. They couldn't go outside of the county without permission, and et cetera, et cetera. They were asked to sign that form, and that was sent out to a number of people. As a result of that, it hit the media, and people went to work on that Monday, Tuesday. Some of them got furloughed because they found out, you attend that Maryville Baptist Church, not even asking, were you there Sunday? Were you not there Sunday? And one person got terminated by his employer, and he had been there for some time. We actually had filed suit, of course, and the lower court, the Obama judge, ultimately denied the injunction, but we asked the Court of Appeals to reverse that and give us an injunction. And on Saturday, they did. They did this very quickly because this was filed late Thursday night. The first time they would have seen it is Friday morning.
You're talking just 48 hours ago.
I'm talking, yes. This Saturday, Saturday afternoon, we got a 3-0 decision in our favor against Governor Beshear in joining him from enforcing this order against the Maryville Baptist Church. It's a great decision, excellent opinion. Actually, we also had the state attorney general that took our side and filed briefs in the case below and at the Court of Appeals as well. So the state AG came on board against the governor, and we got a 3-0 unanimous decision at the Court of Appeals Saturday afternoon.
So is this a temporary injunction? Where do things go from here?
Yeah, it's a temporary injunction. It's an injunction pending appeal. The Court of Appeals still has the actual jurisdiction. As we speak right now, I would have been on that as well, but some of our attorneys are on this call right now with that lower court judge to see what the governor's position is going to be and try to wrap this thing up. But if not, we'll go right back to the Court of Appeals and force some additional movement with the governor to make sure that they have absolutely no intention to harass them, either in the parking lot or in the in-service. This church, as the court said, look, they're not trying to be exempt from some of these health restrictions or social distancing. They just want to incorporate them into their worship service, just like the opportunities that are provided to the secular entities that, frankly, are not even being enforced to have the social distancing and the other kinds of sanitizing efforts that this church has done.
So some of these things just have really gone over the top, and this is really a case in point, and to get that unanimous decision from the Court of Appeals speaks well in favor of Liberty Counsel's suit.
Well, and it's really amazing to see that, because it's unanimous, and they really turn this around quickly, and they understand the emergency nature of it. It's a very well-written opinion, and they also really push back against the governor for blocking all religious services. And he's been duplicitous. On the one hand, he's gone out and said, oh, no, you can still have parking lot services, but his order doesn't say that, and his order says no. And for parking lot services, what did he do? He sent out the police and gave notices of quarantine.
Wow.
So, he has been called on the carpet. The court actually said so and took him to task for that. And for them to act so quickly, it shows how, number one, they understand the Constitution and the immediacy of what's issuing here. Because every single day, in particular every single Sunday or Wednesday when churches meet, there's irreparable harm. You can't ever recover that again. And each time they go to these meetings, they have the threat of these police officers coming back again, as they did on Easter Sunday.
Matt Staver with us from Liberty Counsel. Matt, take us to Virginia, because you've been involved in representing Lighthouse Fellowship Church. Tell us what's going on in Virginia.
Yeah, and Jim, this was another thing that happened over the weekend. Just happened yesterday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, and the U.S. Department of Justice issued what they call a statement of interest, which is actually a legal brief. They filed it in our case, asking for the court to give an injunction. In that particular case, we filed suit on Friday night. The federal court actually there, another Obama appointee, and again, by the way, interesting, it's the same judge who on the same-sex marriage case got the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution confused. But that's a whole other issue. But at any rate, denied this very poorly drafted order. The DOJ became aware of our case last week, and over the weekend was working on this case. On Sunday afternoon, filed in our case on our behalf, asking for the court to issue an injunction. And so we will be dealing with that right away. The governor of Virginia just issued a press conference, and on this specific case, it doesn't look like he's backing down. So this case will be one also that we'll take up to the Court of Appeals very quickly. And
what is the basis for this case?
Here's the case. Virginia says, the governor of Virginia, unlike the governor of Kentucky, where it says no religious services, says, well, we'll throw you a few crumbs. You can have 10 people. Doesn't matter how big your sanctuary is. So on Palm Sunday, this church that does not have internet, and many of its people do not have internet. Some of them are former drug addicts or prostitutes, and they've been redeemed from that lifestyle. And so many of them don't have internet, and the church does not have the internet capability, so it can't just go online. On Palm Sunday, they had 16 people, 6 over the magic number of 10 that the governor divined out of nowhere. 16 people in a 293-seat sanctuary, far and wide spaced out, much more than 6 feet. And on Palm Sunday, police officers entered the church, and as soon as the church service is over, they charged the pastor criminally with a misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to 1 year in prison and $2,500 fine. And then they warned the pastor and the 15 other people that were there that if any of you come back next week, Easter, we'll do the same thing to all of you. We'll do the same thing. Every one of you will get criminally charged. And so they were so terrified, they didn't have Easter service, and they have no alternative to go online. And that's what ultimately resulted in our case being filed.
Folks, it's amazing what is seeing happen so very quickly here across this nation here today, as we are seeing houses of worship under assault in this regard. Matt, we've seen situations where people have been banned from singing or playing instruments that requires blowing into them. It is the lengths that are being gone to. You initiated what's known as Reopen Church. It took place yesterday with a number of churches. What's transpired?
Yeah, Reopen Church begins yesterday and through the weekend, but we're wanting that theme to just continue beyond, and not just during the weekend services, but during the week as well, to have opportunities reopen. We are encouraging churches all over the country to begin the process to reopen in-person services. Of course, we're saying, obviously, not go back to the way you were before the COVID pandemic. We'll get there, but let's begin the process with appropriate sanitizing, social distancing, and so forth. As a result of that, we've had hundreds and hundreds of pastors and churches that have started this past weekend to reopen their churches. Some of those are in places where there's still a lot of real strict restrictions. Others are in places like Texas and Florida where the restrictions have been removed. But many of them are still laboring. We're going to be filing a few more lawsuits this week in different states on behalf of churches. But one church out in just outside of Dallas-Fort Worth, Crossroads Church, is a mega church. And they used our material at reopenchurch.org, which is a page that we have on our Liberty Council website, reopenchurch.org. They used that information, and then they actually expanded on some of the things for their own facility. And they had an amazing series of services yesterday. And we actually link to their particular web pages because they've done it so well, and they really added to the whole idea of how do you go about doing this. And they did a great job yesterday, and they said it was fantastic. The people were very supportive, and they were very, very excited about coming back to church, and they're continuing to move forward beyond here. They're going to have a Mother's Day ceremony next week, but they're doing all the worship online plus in person, and they're taking all the health precautions to make sure everyone is protected, and they've done a fabulous job. So I encourage you to go to reopenchurch.org for more information, and we'll continue to walk pastors through the process of reopening church. Frankly, Jim, churches are more essential now than ever. There is something where in foreign countries, you realize people gather at the risk of their lives. In the United States, we've kind of taken it for granted.
Yeah.
Now that it's been sort of taken away, I'm really praying that there will be a renewed fervor of people wanting to serve the Lord in their communities as they fellowship communally together.
Some will say, though, Matt, our state doesn't allow for this to take place. We would be going against the state or the governor's directives if we would reopen our church.
Well, the government has no authority to put its heavy hand on the church. Some people cite, and wrongly so, Romans 13. Romans 13 and 2 Peter are referring to the government being established by God for what? For law and order, to punish the evildoer and protect the good. That's what it is. But on the other hand, it has no jurisdiction over the church. Jesus really gives that different jurisdiction in Matthew 22:21, where he says, when someone is asking him about taxes, they don't want to pay taxes, and Jesus says, show me the coin. Whose inscription is it? Whose image is it? Well, it's Caesar. And he says, render to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and render to God that which belongs to God. Caesar didn't have jurisdiction over the temple. They didn't have jurisdiction as to how they were supposed to sacrifice or live their lives and go through the different ceremonies. And government doesn't have jurisdiction over the church.
We're going to take a quick break. Matt Staver with us. Be opening some phone lines here in just a moment as well. This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Stay with us. We'll be right back. James 4:14 poses this thought: For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. Have you ever stopped to consider where you will spend eternity? You may say, but I'm a good person. I care for my family. I feed the poor. I stand up for life and traditional values. While all of these things are good, they fall far short of God's standard. Every one of us has a sin issue that must be dealt with. Our sin separates us from God, and each of us deserves to be eternally removed from God in everlasting punishment. But out of God's great love, He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to bear our sins, shed His blood, die on the cross, and rise again. He is the only way of salvation, and it's imperative for you to place your trust in Him. If you're wrestling with this issue, we'd like to send you a complimentary leaflet, Where Will You Spend Eternity? To receive a copy, just ask for it when you call us at 1-800-729-9829. 800-729-9829. Constitutional attorney Matt Staver is with us today here on Crosstalk from Liberty Counsel. Their website's lc.org, lc.org, and also reopenchurch.org, where there's more information there, reopenchurch.org. Matt, frankly, there are pastors across this country who have said, we have just had enough with this. I understand there's even a group of Romanian pastors that have told their governor that very thing.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, they made statements yesterday while they were doing their online services.
This is in the state of Illinois.
Governor today, and this is in Illinois. And so these are Romanian pastors, and the significance about that is Harry Mihet, our chief litigation counsel, also is from Romania. His first day of freedom was December 25, 1989, when the dictator Ceausescu was overthrown on that day. And he remembers the pastors being arrested. His dad had been arrested as a pastor. Many of the pastors still have scars on their backs from the beatings they had. Some of these pastors that are in Illinois, the letter is a very powerful one. It's on our website at lc.org. But they talk about how they came from communist Romania, and they know firsthand what it's like to have religious persecution and have pastors arrested by the government. They came to this land, that their adopted country. They love this country. They support America. They love freedom. And yet what they are experiencing there where they can't worship, they said, we've been patient. Enough is enough. We're going to do social distancing and all the other health precautions to protect our people, but we're beginning to have in-person services on May the 10th. And it's a powerful letter. I encourage people to read it. These are people, Jim, who never thought that as a pastor in the United States of America, they would face arrest for having church, which is what they experienced when they were in communist Romania.
Yeah. Matt, if there are pastors listening now or church leadership and they're looking for some guidance, can they also call Liberty Counsel for that?
Sure, it can. You can call 407-875-1776, 407-875-1776, or you can email us, liberty@lc.org, liberty@lc.org. You can also go to our website, lc.org, for more information, and reopenchurch.org.
Our telephone number to Crosstalk today, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. As you know, Matt, these matters across this nation are getting so egregious. I think of Riverside County, California, just west of Los Angeles. They have now allowed privately owned swimming pools to open so long as there's only one person swimming at a time, regardless of the size or volume of the pool. Western Journal reported that the past Friday, Governor of New Mexico invoked the state's Riot Control Act to lock down the city of Gallup, New Mexico, where this program is heard. All roads leading into the city closed at 12 p.m. Friday to mitigate the uninhibited spread of COVID-19. Then vehicles that did come, only maximum of 2 individuals per vehicle. We've got the California governor shutting down beaches when it's 90 degrees outside. Are we going too far as a nation in all of this?
Oh, yeah, we're going way too far. And the beaches in Florida are open now, but there was a time when some of the beaches, and we're talking about beaches that are between the beginning where the beach is to where the water is, we're looking at 150, 200 feet, maybe even more than a football field long. So it's a wide beach. And they shut those down. And eventually they let you actually open up. And here's the crazy thing. You could actually fish, which means you had to stand still. But women with the moms with their kids, they were told to move because their kids, they couldn't be stationary building sandcastles. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. It's unbelievable, some of these unbelievable, irrational policies. There's one in Texas where a local, I think it's reversed now, but it was in place for a while. You had to have no more than 2 people in the car. And if you had 2 people, even though they're coming from the same household, you had to wear a mask, and you couldn't even have any children under 14 years of age in the vehicle with you.
My. Folks, and not to mention, I should say, the situation here in Wisconsin where a mom was visited by 2 police officers for daring to allow her child to go next door to play with a neighbor. 2 police officers being dispatched, folks, is unbelievable. And I understand, Matt, in some locations, and I believe it's been in the greater New York area, that police have been told they must respond to these 311 calls within 45 minutes, even over emergency calls to 911. 311 is where people can report on one another who are not social distancing.
Yeah, you're talking about when we mentioned Nazi Germany. Remember Anne Frank, the famous Diaries of Anne Frank? Yeah. Well, how did the Nazis find her? And, I've always wondered how in the world would people turn somebody like that in? Well, because they were hiding in his office there in the place where they were hiding. Nobody would have found them, but somebody knew that they were hiding there, and they contacted the Nazi authorities, and that ultimately ended up in the death eventually of Anne Frank. And many others were turned in like that. And you're having all these snitches. And some of the governments, like I know in Colorado, they're encouraging you to snitch on your neighbor.
Yeah. Okay, phone lines are packed. We're going to begin with Jose in Milwaukee. You're on the air, Jose.
Hi, my question is, my church already has all of our information, our name, our address, because we have groups and we're in contact throughout the week normally. But my question is, what is in the way from stopping, let's say, the health department from contacting our pastor, and what is there to, so that he won't actually give them our information? What's stopping that from happening? Thank you.
You mean in Kansas City?
No, he's asking about his city. He lives in Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee. Well, that right now there's nothing that is in the order that I know of for that to happen. However, what happens if somebody comes down with COVID? What church are you a member of? Have you had any contact with any of them? Oh, yeah, it's this church here. Yeah, I met somebody, even though we're not having services right now. And then they start going through the list. I'm not saying that that's happening or will happen there, but seeing what's happening around the rest of the country, it wouldn't be a surprise to me.
Thank you, Jose. Folks, can you imagine what's going on in Kansas City? I mean, your reaction to this, where churches are told to keep the names and addresses and phones of people who enter the church greater than 10 minutes and have those available to turn over to the health department, to the government.
Yeah, and by the way, if something like that happened, that is unconstitutional. That needs to be challenged, litigated. I would not voluntarily turn over that kind of information. The government has no business getting that kind of data.
Salina, Kansas. Steve, you're on the air.
With this government, you're talking about people that have no respect for life. I mean, abortion to them is nothing. So why would they care about religion? God is not in their life. They're, as far as I'm concerned, some of them are of their father, the devil. We're trusting God rather than man. And there will come a time when we might have to disobey. It's just happened in the Bible, and maybe it's our test and time to do it now. I have more faith in God than I do any government, even President Trump. And that's where I put my faith at. And if that, says I'm going to go to church, I'm going to church, and I'll disobey the government. It's come down to that. If we don't stand up, this is a social experiment. They want to see how far they can push us. And so far, you know what? They got the upper hand. It's our time to fight back.
Well, obviously, God's never going to fail you, and that's really where we need to put our trust. And the government has no business dictating how we worship, when we worship. They have no business putting a template, a one-size-fits-all, over every church, every denomination, every form of worship in the state or wherever that may be.
Matt, I just also want to just point out this spewing of hatred that is going on against Christianity, and I'm looking specifically at what came out from the New York City Council Speaker, Corey Johnson, regarding Samaritan's Purse, who went there to help people. They accept anybody to medically. It doesn't matter what, about the individual themselves. But here is a statement that came from their council speaker saying it's time for Samaritan's Purse to leave NYC. This group, led by the notorious bigoted, hate-spewing Franklin Graham, came at a time when our city couldn't in good conscience turn away any offer of help. That time has passed.
It is absolutely shocking, and you think that any media person would be able to get that and just realize how mean that statement is, and anybody who holds a statement like that. This radical LGBT agenda has no tolerance at all for people of faith. I mean, this was raised by LGBT activists when Samaritan's Purse they put their lives at risk, and those people who were volunteering were putting their lives at risk to help people in New York City. And you would think that we could come together as one people. We may have disagreements on different issues, but that's not the time to air them. And yet they put that front and center. I mean, it's stunning. And it really shows how the government, you go back to some of these other repressive regimes, and you see how did the government come to the point where they started targeting certain people, and they began to stigmatize them. And here's what you have happening now, even with people coming together for churches. They'll say, oh, well, you're going to kill people. Well, they never say that about the Home Depots that are packed full or the Kmarts or the Walmarts, but all of a sudden it's just churches are going to do it. Well, no, how about let us have the same equal opportunity to take the same health precautions as some of these other commercial operations that you don't even have any regulation on, frankly, at all.
Douglas in Waukegan, Illinois, you're on the air.
Yes, I appreciate you taking my call. And I'm just thinking that over in China, whenever they bulldoze a church over, there's always 10 or 11 or 12 that pop up somewhere else. These people, they move from out of one building and they go into their individual homes. And I'm wondering, maybe here in America, we ought to start thinking about starting some house churches, since we can't meet together in large groups. The pastors, the preachers, the teachers, the elders, all those who know the scriptures, they can invite their neighbors in who would never go to a church anyway. And perhaps we could start reaching out and evangelizing our neighborhoods and our subdivisions.
Well, Douglas, reaching out in evangelism is critically important always, and now especially. But keep in mind, and Matt will have you comment on this, keep in mind that the government is also creating and encouraging people to snitch on one another. So if one neighbor says, hey, they've got all these people going in their home, guess what? We need to call and report them.
Exactly. So, it's not either or. I mean, you can have home churches, no doubt about that, and many people do, many churches do, and they encourage home groups. But we have to go out into the world as well, not just have our people coming over to the home that we know or somebody who may invite us. We need to go out into the world, and there is a reason why the church is the lighthouse and the place of refuge. But you're right, Jim, because some of these are saying even in your home you can't have a certain amount of people, and you can't have a certain amount of people that are unrelated. So you say, we'll just want to have home churches, but in some of these places they said, no, we've got a better idea for you, and we're not going to let you have that either. Right.
Our telephone number to Crosstalk, thank you, Douglas, is 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. A few open lines. Let's go to Miami, Florida. Courtney, you're on the air.
God bless all you saints. Keep supporting your church. That's why God said he'll put pastors, give you pastors after his own heart to instruct you in that word. And all this for me, I'm going on 80 years old this year, Lord willing. But every day I ask to lift up the name of Jesus. And that's what we should be doing now. All this virus and everything, this is just a way to put it on the older people. It's a plague which God has sent to draw people to him. Us older people, the Bible says us gray-headed ones are supposed to give that word to the younger generation and to the next generation and to the next generation. Not to stay home worried about yourself. You go out because it's not by power, not by might, but by his Spirit, saith the Lord. Saints, be encouraged in the Lord. And the gentleman is on today. I received things from you, and I thank God for you. Keep on running for the Lord, saints. God bless you now.
Thank you, Courtney, for the call. I'm up against a break. We'll come back with more calls. Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel, lc.org. You may also reach them at 407-875-1776. Back in a minute. This is Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Week in Minute, I'm Brennan House. Our website's worldviewradio.com. The globalists cannot let a good crisis go to waste. They also are committed to the long-term goals and objectives of their worldview. Remember the Club of Rome? Well, in 1972, they put out a book, 1972, called The Limits to Growth. It was based on an MIT model, and it was about population control. Well, guess what they did last year, 2019? They released a book called Planetary Emergency Plan. Wow. September 2019, they put out a book called Planetary Emergency Plan. Yep. And it was all about the green agenda and population control. And they talked about 2020 being the year of the super year, quote, super year of 2020, and that it would be 12 critical months for the people, nature, and climate. How did they know this? Many of these groups had their plans ready to go. That's why they're responding to the pandemic as they are.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America, and indeed, in Kansas City, Missouri, keep records of those who are in the building longer than 10 minutes. Your church services, be ready to report their names over to the government. Names, addresses, phone numbers, your reaction to that. Let's see, Phoenix, Arizona, we have Dwayne calling in. Dwayne, you're on the air.
Thanks for taking my call. God bless both of you gentlemen. Matt, it's a great honor to speak with you. What my question is, and a lot of my friends have been asking me, why aren't these pastors who are so close to the president, why aren't they presenting some of the findings? You know, that Dr. Fauci being deep state medical. You know, why isn't the president acting to protect churches if he's such a Christian as people have been portraying him? Why isn't he doing something?
Well, that's a good question. I think some of that information is getting to the president, and in fact, I think that's why the Department of Justice is taking this very strong position that it has taken, and the Department of Justice, which is really the avenue where that would come from, the enforcement avenue, has really taken a very strong position, and that's why I think we see them filing in our case yesterday in Virginia, and I really thank the Department of Justice and Attorney General Barr for doing that. But I think that is all coming from the president as well as the DOJ. Obviously, it makes its own decisions, but I think it's in lockstep with the president's position to stop this unequal treatment to churches. And, you know, as it relates to Fauci, I think I like the president. Certainly, I appreciate his leadership. But Fauci was a bad decision, and Fauci needs to be removed. He is bad news, and he's got some bad intentions for the future of our country.
Well, can I just say that somebody needs to set up a luncheon between the president, Attorney Barr, and Brandon.
Well, let me just, the president, I mean, Attorney Barr is acting on behalf of the president, is he not? He is acting
on behalf of the president, and he's doing a great job. And so he is actually taking all these threats to religious freedoms very seriously. And like I said, how many times have you heard that the Department of Justice works through the weekends and files a brief on Sunday afternoon? And that's what they did in this particular case, because they took the threats to religious freedom in our Virginia case very seriously. That's coming in conjunction with what the president's directive is to protect religious freedom.
Thank you, Dwayne. We're going to go to another Phoenix caller. That's Chuck, who's calling in. Chuck, you're on the air.
Hey, hello there. My name is Chuck, and I've been listening to your program as I was driving on the freeway, actually, and I wanted to point out something to your guest, if he'd heard of what was called the Magdeburg Confession, which established what was called the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. This took place in Magdeburg, Germany in 1550, actually.
Chuck, he's familiar with that, yes.
And I think it's time that many of our pastors and parishioners really get to maybe study that and understand what our responsibility is to the state, but also, too, when they have violated their trust in the church, and that there is actually scriptural foundation of when we have to not go along with what the government is saying for us to do. I know I came across this some years ago, and it had just recently got translated into English after 450 years of not being translated. It was in Latin.
Chuck, thank you. I'm going to comment on that here.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a whole different subject matter to go into, but I think it really comes down to what these Romanian pastors have done when they sent the letter today to the governor of Illinois, and that is that they know what it's like not to have freedom. They know what it's like to have pastors arrested. They don't want to have that happen here in the United States. They're very respectful of the civil authority, of course, but enough is enough. And so they have to do some of the things that God called them to do, and that is to hold service. They'll hold it because it is a command. The government doesn't have any authority to tell them how to hold services and when to hold services. but they'll do it with caution in mind and social distancing and all the other things, just like any other secular entity is doing now or is supposed to be doing. Many of them are not. They're just meeting unrestricted.
And in essence, this is what many sheriffs are doing. County sheriffs are standing up and saying, no, we're not going to enforce these rules.
Like in Michigan, they're just saying, no, we're not. These orders are so far beyond the Constitution. Other places, they're saying, we're not going to enforce it. These are wrong. That's what the Attorney General did in Kansas. Finally, a court agreed with him. But he bucked the governor, said this is unconstitutional. And this is what happened in Kentucky. What's happened there is the Kentucky Attorney General has gone against the governor. And here's what, to a previous caller who said, a lot of these people they don't respect life. They're not going to respect religious liberty. The interesting thing is when you look at the most egregious restrictions on religious freedom, they all have one thing in common. All of these also support abortion through all your, through pregnancy, through all 9 months. They're very radical pro-abortion. And if they don't respect life, they're not going to respect religious freedom either.
Thank you, Chuck. We're going next to Roger in Montrose, Minnesota. You're on the air.
Yes, I wanted to mention, in conjunction with what you're talking about today, the extended shutdowns and stuff like that. In Minnesota, they have increased it to May 19th now, which, lo and behold, covers Mother's Day. And so much of the celebrations that people could have getting together for Mother's Day and eating out as a group and et cetera is under that. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, I agree. And they just, like I said at the beginning of the program, they keep moving the goalposts. And there comes a time when, as these Romanian pastors did in Illinois, is, okay, we were patient, we went along, but enough is enough.
Eddie in Glasgow, Kentucky, you're on the air.
Hey, Brother Jim, thank you for taking my call. I've got a very unusual question, and I would like to have some input on it, please.
Okay, go quickly.
I'm not calling to rattle nobody. This is
Eddie, we're less than a minute, so go quickly.
Okay. Is there any restrictions being made up on the Amish or Muslims or anybody else or just Christian churches? That's my question.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, they're going to be in Pennsylvania, Ohio, other places. Yes, there's restrictions put on them as well.
And what we're seeing, what's interesting, let's go to New York, where we have the mayor of New York calling out Jews. And matter of fact, we're going to be talking about this tomorrow with Friends of Israel, but yet accommodating Muslims during Ramadan.
Right, yeah, and the mayor personally hears that they're going to be having a small service for rabbis. Some rabbis are actually giving respects for a funeral of another rabbi. And he comes in there and interrupts the service of a Jewish funeral. Unbelievable. Yeah. And he threatens them that they need to disperse. But then they're saying, hey, we have some sandwiches and some other food for you for Ramadan. Come and get it free for all. It's amazing the disparate treatment between Jews and Christians versus the Muslim community in some of these jurisdictions.
Matt Staver with us from Liberty Counsel, LC.org. And if you're listening, your church leadership, pastors, you've got specific questions, you can call them. Reach out at 407-875-1776. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from CrosstalkAmerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.
With SRN News, I'm John Scott. The U.S. Senate is about to convene for the first time after a 5-week recess. Bob Agnew reports from Capitol Hill.
Senator Mitch McConnell rejected calls from Democrats who warned it's too soon to reopen, given the still high number of COVID-19 infections in the nation's capital and the relatively tight quarters of lawmakers on Capitol Hill, including staff members and members of the press. McConnell vowing to press ahead, though, with Trump executive and judicial nominations this week. Confirmation votes can only take place with senators bodily present. Confirmation expected this week for Robert Feitel.